G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and a fantastic weekend. Now, I'm sure that you will have noticed that yesterday I did not make a video, and you may notice that my voice is a little bit raspy as well. Yesterday in Australia, we celebrated Anzac Day, the equivalent, I guess, to Memorial Day. We take a day off, we celebrate those who have fallen in battle and those that continue to serve the nation. And it is always a huge day. I was with the boys from 0500 to about 2200, and I had a fantastic day, a much quieter day for myself because, of course, I can't drink and I'm very strict on my keto diet at the moment for my chemotherapy. But all of those who said g'day to me, had a chat, all of that, thank you so much. It really does sink in of how much you do miss hanging out with the boys every single day. No one misses the job. They miss the boys. And those who then had a minute's silence to remember those that are no longer with us or those that continue to serve us, then I hope you had a fantastic day as well. Now, legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. Now, this video is likely going to be demonetized because I'm going to talk about a car bomb, a VBIED, vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. So if you'd like to support me, there's links down below. We're, of course, going to look at maps. We're going to look at some satellite imagery of missile attacks. We'll talk about those missile attacks. And, of course, we will look at some imagery of that ammo dump that went boom as well. And then we need to look at the peace framework from the US and from Europe and Ukraine, and where there's maybe some overlap in that, where they are so far apart, and what is realistic, what is idealistic. And look, at this point in time, I just think the diplomacy that is like the real politic diplomacy, objective realities are just not being taken into account here. And it's probably going to be a little bit controversial, but when we talk about the way Trump negotiates in the art of the deal, I actually think he's starting high for Ukraine and is willing to work actually in Russia's favor, because I can't see even the American deal that Putin would agree to. But I will talk about why I believe the Kremlin will entertain that deal. So we're going to go over all of that and maybe some possible outcomes and the forbidden question that you're not allowed to ask. So let's start at these missile attacks and ammo dump. And this may set us up a little bit more for talking about then these peace negotiations, deals, whatever you want to call it. So we do have then this satellite image has come out here. Now, everyone crops it out, but MT Anderson, he's the one that has then posted this. Now, in this initial post, this is the approximate area that has been damaged. I'll show you in 1 second a better image. You can follow this gentleman here, and this was most likely from human error. I don't think many people anymore are really asking if it wasn't or not. That's sort of been accepted, but that human who made the error very likely is no longer with us. So let's have a little bit more of a look here. And we can see in this then before and after photograph, there is a lot of damage to this. So you can see where has been impacted and where has not been. As far as what real effect we will see, it's very hard to know because we do know Russia just has so much open air storage. More important stuff will be in bunkers, and it's said that that hasn't been affected or as affected, so we'll wait and see. Now, Russia, not last night, the night before, has carried out a massive missile attack, one of the largest missile attacks on Ukraine throughout this entire war. Now, Trump is not happy about it, but there's a bit of footage we need to pull out as well, and this gives us an idea about the state of Ukraine's air defense also. And I believe, yes, this is from the BBC. We see this missile striking here. Now, in this footage, I believe these are Iskanders, not that it really matters technically for what we are speaking about. We'll move forward in the footage. Now, this is Kyiv, and you can see where there has been other strikes, and then you can see then further in this footage where there are strikes, multiple strikes of these missiles. So that does tell us about the state of air defense, which is likely going to get worse if the US walk away and US not open to Ukraine purchasing more of those systems. Now, to get BDA, battle damage assessment, on any strikes is near impossible, as it is highly illegal to film like that, and even more highly illegal to film where somewhere has been struck. When I was in Ukraine, I did this and I got in a little bit of strife. Not as much as some other people did, I was just told to delete it, not like you see some of the other bits and pieces now further on. Now, AMK mapping, he has some satellite imagery here. Remember, I try and provide all of the like handles of people you can go and follow. Imagery reveals that the Artem defense plant in Kyiv was hit by Iskander-Ms during that attack. And we can see that this is the after photo and this is the before photo of then this building here. And then he has a second one here as well. And you can see the before and after images, and this was then a serial production plant, he says, in Kyiv. Now, in these strikes as well, there was a lot of civilian casualties, as we see with air strikes. And Trump, he's not happy about this happening. He said, "I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. They're not necessary and a very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done." So saying, look, this is not great. We're trying to get a peace deal across and you're sending some of the largest missile attacks into Ukraine. And one of the things I'll pull out of this is I just don't think that Putin is serious about this peace deal. I think he's entertaining it, because as long as he's entertaining it and showing the US that he is not the one holding it up, that it's Zelensky doing it, as long as he keeps presenting that, the US will likely withdraw, because what the US has put forward, we do know that Ukraine is very likely, or highly likely at this point in time, not going to agree to it. It's important to say at this point in time, because the way attritional warfare works, in my assessment right now, I do believe that things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. We'll talk about that to do with this VBIED. Now, what we have got, and Reuters has got their hands on, is the framework of the US and Europe. So we're going to go over these frameworks and then talk about where Putin, Zelensky, in Europe are sitting. So, again, this is said to be the final offer from the US, that there will be a permanent ceasefire. Both sides immediately engage in technical implementation of negotiations. So ceasefire, but with these conditions, and then further movements on where things end up sitting. There will be a Ukrainian security guarantee. We don't know how this will actually look, but that Ukraine will receive robust security guarantees. Guarantor states will be an ad hoc grouping of European states plus willing non-European states, so say like Australia, Japan. Ukraine will not seek NATO membership, and I think that would be in writing that will be forever, that they will never seek NATO membership. Ukraine may pursue EU membership. Now, that is across then the European one as well for EU membership. And if we look back at what we sort of got from the Ankara meetings in 2022, I don't think that Russia's that much against Ukraine seeking EU membership at this point in time. Territory. US provides de jure. So de jure means like recognized as Russian territory, recognition of Russian control of Crimea. Now, this is the primary point Ukraine is never going to agree to. Zelensky is saying can't agree to it through the constitution. It'd be up to the people. It'd be interesting to see what the people would actually think of that. Also, though, US provides de facto. So de facto in this case is meaning we recognize it is Ukrainian territory, but controlled by the Russians, of Luhansk. So all of you at Luhansk, Russia occupy about 99% of Luhansk Oblast at this point in time. De facto recognition of the Russian-controlled parts of Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Kherson. So not all of it, not to that border line, but where the front line is sitting at this point in time. And that Ukraine will regain Kharkiv, so where Russia has crossed in the northeast. I'll show you all this on a map in a sec. Ukraine regains control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the ZNPP, through US control and administration of the plant. And electricity will just be distributed to both occupied areas, Ukrainian-controlled areas, and Russia, and control of the Kinburn Spit. So what we are talking about, this is Kinburn Spit out here. ZNPP sits at Erdem Hadar up here. And then Novokhovka, this is where that dam sits as well that was just mysteriously blown up, and the Spider-Man meme of everyone pointing at each other. But basically saying that the front line would stop relatively here. This is that part of Kharkiv that would go back, but and up in here as well, apologies. But the front line here, these would become de facto, and this would become de jure. Ukraine enjoys unhindered passage of the Dnieper River, and control Kinburn split. Economics. US and Ukraine will implement economic cooperation and minerals agreement. Ukraine to be fully reconstructed and compensated financially. We believe likely out of that minerals agreement, that rebuild strategy that Trump has put forward. Sanctions on Russia resulting from this conflict since 14 will be removed. So not since 22, but back to 14. US-Russian economic cooperation on energy and other industrial sectors. Now, I believe the whole bit with the ZNPP here, this is to sort of, for want of a better term, throw Ukraine a bit of a bone in this, because of course you can see that this is Russia walking away with a fair bit. But I still do not believe that this is enough for Putin to really come to the table. Now, talking about this, then cooperation financially here, and Trump isn't happy on how this is going either. Just 6 hours ago from midday in Australia, Trump has said Ukraine, headed by Volodymyr Zelensky, has not signed the final papers on the very important rare earths deal with the US. It is at least 3 weeks late. Hopefully, it will be signed immediately. Work on the overall peace deal between Russia and Ukraine is going smoothly. Success seems to be in the future. He seems to think success is in the future. I think we're at a continuation of the war, because when we look at where Europe and Ukraine are sitting, where their framework is, well, we see that the ending of the war may be more elusive than we thought. That there will be commitment to a full and unconditional ceasefire in the sky, land, and at sea. Both sides immediately enter into negotiations on technical implementation with the participation of the US and European countries. This is in parallel to preparation of the agenda modalities for a full peace deal. So the unconditional ceasefire starts first. We'll talk about why Europe and Ukraine want that so much before. Oh, we're not talking about territory. We're not talking about territory. Why they want that first. Ceasefire monitoring, led by the US and supported by third countries. So they don't want the US withdrawing out of here. What tells us a lot about then Europe's ability and willingness to continue monitoring areas as well as just military industry. Russia may unconditionally return all deported and illegally displaced Ukrainian children, exchange of all prisoners of war, and release of all civilian prisoners. The security guarantees for Ukraine. Ukraine receives robust security guarantees from the US, from the US, Article 5-like agreement, while there is no consensus among allies on NATO membership. But this is keeping it still on the table. This is where Putin will go, no, because this is just de facto NATO. If there's an Article 5-like agreement, it's de facto NATO. No restrictions on the Ukrainian defence forces, so size or capabilities. The guarantor states will be an ad hoc group of European countries and willing non-European countries. No restrictions on the presence, weapons and operations of friendly foreign forces on the territory of Ukraine. Again, de facto NATO, even if it's not spelt out. Ukraine pursues accession to the EU. Territorial issues will be discussed and resolved after a full and unconditional ceasefire. That's important. Territorial negotiations start from the basis of the line of control. So the negotiations here start from the line, not what Putin is requesting. Ukraine regains control of the ZNPP with US involvement, so not anything to do with Russia, and also the Kakhovka Dam, as I showed you before. Ukraine enjoys unhindered passages on the Dnieper River and control of the Kinburn Spit. So you can see where some of these are getting overlapped. Economics. US and Ukraine implement economic cooperation minerals agreement. Ukraine will be fully reconstructed and compensated financially. So that bit is the same, except for this, including through Russian sovereign assets that will remain frozen until Russia compensates damage to Ukraine. So we'll keep those assets, we'll fund it out of that. Until then, you free up billions of dollars more to then financially compensate. US sanctions imposed on Russia since 2014 may be subject to gradual easing after a sustainable peace is achieved and subject to resumption in the event of a breach of the peace agreement. So if there's a breach, they'll be put back in. But an ease of this. Given the situation, this is not going to be signed by Russia or supported by Trump. So let's go over where Russia and Ukraine are sitting and where I see the sticking points on this and where diplomacy and political theatre is being played. Now, as poor as the US deal is for Ukraine, I can't see Putin even agreeing to that, let alone agreeing to Europe's. Constitutionally, Russia has absorbed Crimea and the 4 oblasts in question. So if he had to walk away from this, this is a major political loss also. I think even at a starting point would be de jure control of those for Putin. I believe that's where he is sitting. Maybe where you could negotiate some of this, maybe to Putin, is de jure control of the current line of contact, not de facto. I think this would be an absolute bare minimum of where Putin is sitting, along with no implementation of NATO or de facto NATO Article 5 like agreements, restrictions, and all of that. Now, in diplomacy in war, it doesn't need to be fair. It is who is left. And I believe we're going to see that play out with this war continuing, because I just don't see Putin can agree to that, and Zelensky with Crimea especially, and no real, maybe some security promises, but it's not absolute set in stone and limitations. I don't see how he can agree to this either. Now, with Putin for a second, before we go on to Zelensky, we've seen Trump's art of the deal take place in the minerals deal. Of course, what part of his art of the deal is you start high and work down. So it seems like you are the one making a compromise. So what he does goes, Zelensky, I want $300 billion of minerals. Then when it gets settled at 100 or whatever it is, $100 billion, it looks like the US has made compromise, when really all they were after was that $100 billion to start with. Now, I think we can implement this here, but in the reverse of how many people are actually seeing this. I think that Trump has aimed high in his negotiation, but not in Ukraine's favour. I think he has aimed high of where may Russia go, and we may compromise then in the reverse of that. That concerns me, that even what's being presented and people say is an extreme deal in Russia's favour, I still don't think is enough for where Putin's vision is. And what I will say in that, of the de facto control of these regions, Putin would go, I already have de facto control of these regions. I'm still moving forward. If I just dig in, what are you going to do then? So let's talk about Zelensky and the European deal. And Zelensky has said that I agree with Trump that Ukraine doesn't have the weapons to retake Crimea, but we have sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Now, the European-Ukrainian deal, this whole deal is based on Russia giving up their leverage while the West retains all of their leverage. Sanctions, economic restrictions, all of that. And this is exactly why they will have the rhetoric of, well, we'll chat about territory later after an unconditional ceasefire, because doing that works in their favour. Because the leverage Russia has is territorial and primarily military leverage. The leverage the West has is economic. So what I'm saying is this unconditional ceasefire is not unconditional. It's that unconditionally you stop military actions while we keep in place then our leverage of economic pressure. And then that is just not going to take place, because what they're trying to do in this, and they're playing, at diplomacy, at politics here, is they want to shift the battlefield to where Russia is vulnerable. And that shift of the battlefield is the guns falling silent, but economic sanctions still being in place. And Putin and his team, regardless of what people say about them, they're not dumb, and they're not going to do this. Speaking of Crimea, I agree that Ukraine doesn't have the weapons to retake Crimea, but also, in a military sense, Ukraine doesn't have the men to ever retake Crimea militarily either. The cost of that operation would be insane, regardless of weapons. That it would be one of the most difficult operations to plan. There's one way in, and that's going to be heavily, heavily guarded, defended. It's been held for now 11 years. So there's a lot of politics in this, and looking at these, I just don't see that either is going to be accepted, because Putin probably wants more on the American deal. He's not going to go for that. And Zelensky's not going to go. And the other way, Putin will laugh at that European deal. Now, Trump has said in this 3 hours ago, I just landed in Rome. A good day in talks and meetings with Russia and Ukraine. They are very close to a deal, and the two sides should now meet at very high levels to finish it off. Most of the major points are agreed to. Stop the bloodshed now. We will be wherever is necessary to help facilitate the end to this cruel and senseless war. So maybe I'll be incorrect that we're going to see the war continue, and maybe this is correct, that all the major points are agreed to. The major points will be NATO and territory. Ukraine's major point is territory. Russia's major point is NATO. I believe you could make Russia compromise on territory for then NATO being out of the question. For Ukraine, they need to keep NATO in question, and I don't believe at all that they will ever negotiate on territory. So maybe I'm going to be incorrect and Trump is, but I think we'll likely see this continue. But nobody's asking this question here. And of course, we all know why this isn't being asked. And I've coined this the forbidden question. That is, what do you do if Putin says no? No one has a real answer to this, but I will put in then the 18th sanctions package. In my opinion, Putin will laugh at the European peace framework, and he will entertain the US framework playing politics because he knows Ukraine will not agree to that. And he hopes that he'll show Trump that he is the willing party, that it's Zelensky who's unwilling, and the US will then walk away. Okay, then let's ask another forbidden question. Then what happens then? If the US walks away, what happens? What is Europe's actual plan at that point in time? Okay, do you unfreeze the 290 or 300 billion euros? Okay, do you unfreeze that? Where are you spending it? Are you going to spend a decade rearming, reindustrializing? That'll be great long-term for Europe, but it is way too long-term. What then do you do? And these are these questions of which we know the answers to. I think most people who look at this through an objective, real sense know the answer to. But again, what is the actual plan here? What if he just says, no, I'm continuing the war. I haven't met my political aims through then military actions, Clausewitzian theory. What happens then? What is Europe willing to do? And their willingness so far hasn't assured me that it's going to end in a great way. Germany won't even send long-range missiles until 3.5 years in. And that 300 billion, one, there's a large threat of undercutting economies there, but also there's already been 300 billion go. Of course, this will impact the cost of the war, but what happens if then in 3 years' time, it's searching for another $300 billion and the front line has deteriorated further and we're 1 million men down the track? And that has always been what I've said since 2022. I believe by the end of this war, we will see 1 million men dead. And I believe that we're probably at about 350 to 400,000. It is horrific. Now let's talk about this car bomb, then we'll have a quick squiz at the maps. Now, what we saw was this happen in Moscow, and the general, a Russian general, Yaroslav Moskalik, he was killed by a car bomb basically at the front of his home. Now, we have seen multiple attacks use tactics like this. Overwhelmingly, these are orchestrated by Ukrainian intelligence services. Now, what we do see is that some of these have caused civilian casualty, but we don't get any comment from any other leaders or any outrage when we do see that there is civcas or then other targets have been hit. Daria Dugin is a good example of this. Now, regardless of what you think of Alexander Dugin, he's definitely not a military target. You can think he's an extremist, you can think he's a radicalist, you can think anything of it. But as far as the evidence of him advising or even meeting Putin is absolutely limited. But we see no outrage about this. But is this guy a military target? Absolutely. But we need to look at what the differences are between then optics, philosophy, and legality as well, okay? Now, wrong slide. Got a sneak peek. Now, legality, philosophy, and morality both come into question here, aka how it's seen, how do people see this, and the legal status. And this can be different, often by association. Now, is this, to my knowledge, a legitimate legal military target? Yes. This can change with then if there is mass civcas involved. And of course, we see those non-combatant values come into play. But is what I've seen here a legitimate military target? Yes. But in war too, in a war like this that has a lot of optics, especially for Ukraine, because their military aid is from outside of Ukraine coming in, so optics matter a lot. How is it seen? How is this any different to missiles firing in, even if the outcome is the same, okay? Firing missiles is seen as like formal military action, that it's state-recognised war or conflict, where IEDs or car bombs, these are seen as asymmetric or associated with being unlawful, insurgents, or terrorist activity. Now, what I'm saying is, I believe this is legal, but I think Ukraine needs to be actually careful with the optics of how people see this, although I don't think Europe is ever going to really care. But as I've stated, and as history shows, as war progresses, especially attritional war, it becomes more violent, and many standards, rules, or self-imposed ethics become then thrown out the window. And we've seen this through the Great Wars, as far as the use of gas, unrestricted submarine warfare, and even targeting civilians, and that this will get far more messy before it gets better. That's very clear. But back to that legal versus optics argument. I believe this attack is very highly likely legal, but I think Ukraine needs to be very careful with the optics of this. Put it like this. How would this be seen if it was in reverse? Okay? Now, will we see Russia's intelligence services, domestic, foreign, military, FSB, SVR, GRU, will we see them conduct attacks like this in Kyiv? Now, I think likely not, currently due to the optics, and that they know with Russia-US relations right now are taking place, the optics of this could be catastrophic. Or then, because it's seen different, that they could fire a missile in, and even if the non-combatant casualty value is higher with the missile than something like this, the optics, as I've said, is seen differently. So I think they'd go more that route because the US would see it as more legitimate, if that makes sense. Remember, they are worried still about the optics here and keeping the US somewhat, I guess, working with them. But I will say about these intelligence services, I think these groups likely will have more of an impact with targeting military companies in Europe. If you ever wonder why there's so many fires at military companies in Europe, well, I wouldn't be looking at the fire extinguishers out of date stamp. Okay, so yeah, that was just a talk, I guess, on the morality, ethics, and how then things are seen. So, for instance, let's talk about Israel here. That a lot of the strikes from planes are seen as far more legitimate than the Pages incident, even if the non-combatants was higher in one or the other. Remember, Ukraine need to maintain then their centre of gravity, and their centre of gravity is not in Kyiv. Their centre of gravity is in the Western support. So optics is a massive one on that. That is why propaganda is such an important tool, but also why those pushing back on it are also vilified and demonised as well. Okay, so let's have a look at the maps. Here is Ukraine in the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14. The red check that you will see is ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. We'll also be going back 48 hours because we missed yesterday. Firstly, let's come up into then Sumy, Kursk Oblast, where this is difficult to know exactly what is happening here. Surek says that this part right in here has gone back to the border in Russia's favour, and we do have a geolocation I need to show you today, which does line up with where the Syriac map is. So let me show you right here. This is Gornal. This unlabelled little town in here is called Gornal, and we can see that Surek is saying right down to this waterway through here has all come back under control of the Russian forces, and given the geolocations that I've seen, it tends to line up. So I want to show you again, this is a zoom in of this area here. Remember, Gornal, and we're talking, there's a little tree line just in here, so it's just east of that, as well as a small tree line right here. It's just to the south of that. In this footage, we see geolocation of Russian elements. Now, it should be definitely grey. I don't know if that meets the threshold for red, but it's at, sorry, let me bring this up, 238 and 340. What we see in this footage is something we have seen evolving for some time, is then drones talking to soldiers on the ground and controlling their movements. And we know this has been happening for some time, but this will be getting absolutely down to an art for the Ukrainian and Russian forces after 3 and a bit years of using drones and infantry tactics. So we can just see these are Russian troops moving on your screen in here, confirming that location. Then we come to I'm a bit too far, 340. Now, this is a bit more difficult to see because it's like filmed off a bloody screen. You can see, wait till they start moving, just in here, you can see those soldiers there. So definitely a presence in there, therefore great. But what is actually going to happen in this area on this front? Well, Suryak, he has had some predictions here, and what we can see is he's saying that there's going to be a large push across here. Now, he shows where already there has been Russian pushes across, but there's going to be some level of buffer zone. Remember, Ukraine wanted to make that buffer zone and control territory for negotiations, and now Russia will want the opposite to this. Now, what we can expect from Sumy is the creation of a buffer zone on the border of a dimension not so different from the area north of Kharkiv, around Vovchansk, with the aim of avoiding a new operation in Kursk and further damaging the Ukrainian command for its management and sending of resources to other fronts. Now, I think this is more important than the territory here. I think if Russia managed to actually push that back to the border and then cross, the tactical victory of doing that is going to be 10% of what the informational victory of the cost of Ukraine's operation will be for the Russians. This dynamic has already begun in February and has allowed Russian forces to seize some localities. It is possible that the advance will continue a few kilometres further inland, reaching two important points or zones. That is, first, the Psiel River, a natural barrier that will allow them to secure attacks from the south and force Ukraine to send reinforcements that could be used to penetrate Belgorod. The second is the town of Yanakivka, the main urban area in the region, the capture of which would provide a logistical node from which to expand control southwards and a future possibility. However, it is possible that this locality could become a new Vovchansk and ending in a long positional battle. So Vovchansk, we have barely seen, this sits over here, barely move. So he's talking about that movement down into Yanakivka in here and using some of the waterways as natural barriers, borders. Okay, so let's then move our way further down the map. And today we do see, just to the north of where the Kurkov front was and Rivki front, we do see more red check on this map indicating Russian advancement. Now, I don't believe that is a new update at all. I think that is still catching up. Other maps have shown this for some time. Then we come up into the Pokrovsk front. Now, no changes shown on this map today or yesterday, but if we look on the map here for Suryak, here's indicating that there is movement out to the north here, as well as down in the south. Minor movements around this area, but again, fattening, expanding then what will likely become the western flank of Pokrovsk. Then we need to move to the east of here. Now, that is the only map update. So then let's step back to yesterday and turn this back on. Now, what we'll see here is in three different directions from Kalinove, Balanivka, Tarasivka, there has been Russian advances. You can see an envelopment occurring in here. And there is also geolocations to further back this up. So I can delete that now in my memory. Now, what we need to look at is then this area around Tarasivka. The Russian army made new advances southeast of Tarasivka. So what we need to look at in this is where do things line up? And remember, and this is shown for some time, it is showing that Russia has then advanced through and is occupying the majority, if not all, of Tarasivka. Remember, this is the road. See this? Where my cursor is? This is this road. So saying it is a fair bit further forwards, and also saying that there is eastern movement. So what we can pull out of this is we can pull that there's definitely eastern movement to the south of Tarasivka. We can confirm that. We can also confirm that Suryak, when he claimed that there was movement up into these tree lines a few days ago, we can confirm that that has now occurred, either by crystal ball or by non-delaying maps. Then we can come into the Toretsk front and have a look on this. And what we see is this is very dynamic, very fluid. So Ukraine army regained lost positions, lost 8 days ago on the Fomhivka district. In addition, the latest visual evidence confirms Ukrainian forces managed to re-enter Zabalka district. It is possible that this section had been grey zone for some time. On the other hand, Russian army made some new progress on the pond area north of Toretsk. So the way to get an idea of where this is these then spoils of dirt here, this Tedekon, so pushing down into this area here. Again, not even shown in grey zone at this point, so we can confirm Ukraine likely hold this area in here, as well as some positions just below this Tedekon, right in this sector in here. And he's saying that just out to the north here, that Russia has made some further advancements in this direction out in here. This is where these ponds are sitting. You see that like fish hook shaped pond is right in here. So a lot of movements. We'll get a better idea if things slow down, and things on the maps are slowing down. That's not a surprise to see. But again, we see peaks and troughs of things going fast and slow, and eventually in attritional war, there will be a collapse somewhere in the willingness of society to fund the war, economic collapse or military collapse too. That we do know that we are heading towards that. We just don't know which one is going to be the one we land at first. So we can say that we think that line is closer to some than others, but we don't know yet, and unless we have the crystal ball that apparently all these other channels have had. And we will see, and I do believe we will see increased Russian missile attacks somehow since April 2022, when they've been out of missiles, they continue to fire them in. Legends, you have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.